Hey, deserving listeners, Natalia Grace.
And then it's like, okay, I'll only say it if you don't tell her. She bit me when I was a baby. But the thing is, she didn't know any better.
Again, the producers of this documentary, or whatever we want to call it, are non-consensually sharing information. I mean, you have a child that just said, I'll tell you if you don't tell Natalia. Because, children, they don't necessarily understand the broader context here. And you would think they would include this. Now, maybe after they asked her, so you know that Natalia's going to see this potentially. Is it okay if we publish it? And the kid said, okay, but I doubt it, right? So it's pretty gross. They just shouldn't have included this. You're using a child. Yeah. So moving on, we hear that she is saying, she bit me. And, one, siblings do that sometimes. Two, given her history with the Barnetts alone, right? This is the man's family. This is one of the kids. And the Natalia would have went to live with the Manns. In my notes, do I have exactly when that happened? 2014 was when she connected with Cynthia Manns, and then she moved in 3 days later. So, and that was, I think, soon after, she was in an apartment. Natalia was in an apartment for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then in Lafayette met Cynthia Manns and then moved in with her. Anyway, so it would be also normal for Natalia to have some behavioral problems given what she's been through. Also what she went through with the Barnetts alone, right? So I think that's all that we're hearing. It's not great, but it's not an indication that Natalia is some sort of psychopathic con artist monster.
She did, but she said it was like when she was 10. And she didn't really know.
Okay, according to the sibling, I think this is a sibling, it happened when Natalia was 10. It sounds like Natalia told her that she did it and felt bad about it. I think that's what we're hearing. And so 10, yeah, that would have been at the very beginning of her moving in with the Manns family. So, you could imagine an adjustment period there, a jealousy of a younger child that's getting attention. It's normal. It's not great, but it's again, not an indication that she's a psychopathic monster.
Bye-bye.
The Manns took her to the hospital, St. Franciscan, and, the report was she'd harmed one of their children and that she had been disruptive in the house. She had been violent.
Okay, so wait, I wish we could just read that report. Let's see if I can get a screenshot of it. Okay, so I just read through the report. I got a little screenshot of it. And long story short, it appears that Cynthia Manns or Antoine Manns, one of them, brought her into the ER in 2013 because she was being violent with the other kid, the kid that was interviewed earlier. So there seemed to be that. And, the fact that they brought her to the ER says something, right? Because if it was just a bite and then it's like, hey, don't do that, that's one thing. Typically what happens if you're bringing a kid to the ER, they're out of control ongoing, right? And so that's a possibility. Now, in the report, it didn't say anything about that. So it could have been just they just didn't know what to do and they bring her to the ER and the incident was minor. It doesn't seem likely. Now, it would be expected, it would be unfortunate that the younger daughter was being harmed in that way, but given everything that's happening, it's understandable that Natalia would have some acting out. And then the report went on to talk about what Natalia's reasoning for being upset, and according to the report, Natalia said that she doesn't like it when people talk about her past, which we could imagine. So she's saying that's what triggered her. So maybe the Manns were asking about her past, and then I'm guessing if that happened, which is speculative, we could imagine that Natalia would be worried that if she brings up the past, that will cause her to be rejected by the Manns, who she has this burgeoning attachment with.
The report was she'd harmed one of their children and that she had been disruptive in the house. She had been violent, and they wanted to leave her there, and she wasn't welcome back in their home. And there was also additional parts of that report where Natalia wanted to take a taxi to go back to the Manns, and allegedly when the hospital reaches.
Okay, so there's another report, again, 2013. I think this is at the hospital. Spoke with patient about following up with the resources given to her by social work. Explained to patient the people that brought her in do not want to be contacted by her after she stated she had tried to call them 14 times and they didn't answer. That's interesting. So it sounds like the Manns family were saying, look, she's just someone that we befriended who lives nearby. We felt bad for her situation. We opened up our home to her at times, and she went after our. So that says something about the severity of the attack, right? Because, or I don't know, maybe it could have been minor, and the Manns family is just like, look, we just don't want to. So they said, we're done with her, and she called them 14 times. And they didn't answer, which is consistent with other things that we would hear. When she was in the apartment by herself, she was, really desperate, which makes sense. And then going on, she said that they were going to give her a ride home and told her we would give her a taxi voucher to get home. Patient didn't seem to understand why they wouldn't want to have her around the house because she states they are such good friends. She said she would try to get a hold of them again tomorrow. I encouraged her to try to call one time, and if they didn't answer, she should leave them alone. Asked patient if it was okay to call her adoptive parents and talk with them about what is going on, and she agreed. I called the adoptive dad. So this is just a little side note. This is a very typical progress note or medical note. And in my field, we have similar notes and are required to keep those records in our sessions or contact with our clients. And one of the things that I have a pet peeve with my supervisees is that they won't use complete sentences. There's all these phrases, and often they will leave out the subject of the sentence. So, because I'm inserting it as I'm reading it, the sentence actually is, it just starts with, asked patient if it was okay. So there's no subject. Who asked patient if it was okay? Well, the implication is it's I asked, because the author is a registered nurse. You can see that at the top. So the nurse is writing it, and it's like, why not just say I? It doesn't take long to type I. I asked patient. And when I ask people, including medical professionals, why they leave that out, they provide no viable answer. The answers I'll get are, well, it's what we've always done, or it's what I was taught to do, or I thought that this was more of a professional looking sort of note. Because I think somehow it got into people's heads when they were learning how to write academically in high school or something, that if you can't say I, but it's much more clear. Progress notes are supposed to be understandable and understandable not only to other clinicians, of course, but also to the patient, because patients have access to these, and they have, to some extent, a legal right to these notes, and therefore it should be written so that they can understand them. I was taught that your notes should be understandable at like an 8th grade reading level, not at a doctoral reading level like us clinicians. So you have to not use jargon. You have to be understandable. It has to be clear, to the point. And so, someone reading this would say, asked patient, and plus they use the abbreviation PT for patient. And I get that because, you're typing patient so often, but at the same time, it doesn't take a long time, and you don't print these out, so you're not wasting ink. Just type out patient. It's not hard. But that's okay, because, you could tell someone, but asked patient, and then the next sentence, called the adoptive dad. Just say, I called. Who called? Because the other thing is sometimes you have a team of people that are doing things and someone else called. And if you don't include the subject of the action, then it can be ambiguous, and you need to be very clear. So yeah, all of my supervisees have heard me get on them about this. It's plus, like, what would be the bad consequence to having a full sentence? I called. Like, what would be the viable criticism against that? Anyway, if you have any ideas about this, tell me, because just seeing actual medical professionals do this stuff too, I don't understand. Now, this note is fine because you can basically tell, but there are much more egregious situations. Like if you're a family therapist and you're seeing the parents and like 3 kids, and you start sentences that don't have subjects in it, then you don't. It is ambiguous. If say talked to child about their trauma history. Well, who was it? The therapist or the parent? Anyway. Called the adoptive dad, and the advocate, so I think the Barnetts, who said a lot of her history and attempted to murder 2 times adoptive mother, 1 time by poisoning and the other time by electric fence, that electric fence thing. So that's interesting because most of the time we're hearing about the poisoning, but at this point, at least Christine is still focusing on the electric fence. And that's not super plausible, right? That you would, and I've already been over that. So I don't know, it's another detail that adds, because if there was something else in there, like she tried to stab me once or something, then it would be harder to refute. But the notion that this very tiny person who has a hard time even walking would have even the remote ability, let alone the notion themselves that they could actually push someone into electric fence. Plus, I don't think electric fences would be strong enough to kill someone. Anyway, he also states that she has been in and out of psych facilities and is a danger to society. She manipulates people into caring about her and then plans ways to physically harm them. He also, so this is Michael talking. He also states that she is not from the Ukraine. So that's their words. He also states that she is not from the Ukraine and has fake documents to make it appear that she is from there. That's interesting. So was that in season 1 that they were thinking that she wasn't from? Yeah, right. They thought that she was an imposter. She wasn't even Natalia. She was this imposter. So they were still thinking that or believing that or trying to make other people believe that. So, This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So I remember as a kid, the adults in my life would talk about how the older that they got, the faster that time moves by. And I even remember as a kid when I was like 10 years old thinking that when I was younger, time moved more slowly. Now, there are a few reasons for this phenomenon, but one of the reasons seems to be that the older we get, the more we fall into a routine and we stop really paying attention to our lives. Well, of course, therapy can be a wonderful place to slow things down and give us a chance to focus on things. Generally speaking, therapists are pretty good at creating a space for us to do that. And sometimes it seems like we need that outside influence to get us to slow down. Well, one place you can find a therapist is BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. So take a moment, visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
Out to the Mans, they're told she can't come back, she's not welcome, we don't want her calling us anymore. When you look at all the families that she's been connected to that we are aware of, from the Chacones to the Barnetts to the Mans, all of these families are reporting similar instances where Natalia has inflicted harm on a family member.
Yeah, and I've been saying from the beginning that it is quite possible that the Barnetts' claims, not necessarily the poisoning or the electric fence, but the, at the foot of the bed with the knife, or the smearing of the feces on the siblings, or other kinds of harmful, abusive behavior from Natalia to others. It's possible that it absolutely did happen, but it doesn't mean that she's this, irredeemable monster, or that all the other allegations are true as well. You know what I mean? So that is interesting, though, because to get that report that was given by the Mans, it's not the Barnetts, it's the Mans who are. So at some point, Natalia must have made up with them, and presumably those kinds of things didn't happen, at least to nearly that degree, because they've been with her for so many years.
Are we all saying that all of these folks are wrong and are liars, and that Natalia is simply this innocent bystander? She's this innocent wallflower who's just been...
Well, the lawyer's doing a good job at trying to paint a picture, but the amount of people, at least we've seen in the documentary, as to the actual firsthand accounts it's mainly Christine, and now we have an account from the Manns and Michael, but mainly Christine, because we don't have, well, he might be referring to accounts from the Jacones, but I feel like we would have seen that if they had access to that. So it's not like it's this mountain of evidence. Oh, and then from the hospital, there were accounts, but not as severe as what Christine was saying. Anyway.
I never even spoke with the hospital people because she was an adult, so they would not let me in with her. I feel like Christine definitely must have called the hospital and told them that this is what happened and all these things, because those are not my words. I don't know who drew that up, who wrote.
Wait, what? Patient brought to ER by friend tonight, I'm guessing that's Cynthia, for a psychiatric evaluation after becoming very angry earlier today and attacking her friend's daughter. So that, today while patient was at school, advocate, I don't know. This sounds fishy because the nurse is saying, you've called the Manns 14 times, they're not answering. And the Manns told us they don't want you to be with them anymore. So, I don't know. I have a hard time believing that the nurse would call Christine. And it's also, it looks like, they called Michael. Not that that wouldn't necessarily change the allegation here, but I have a hard time believing that the nurse would call the family, the Barnetts, and then Christine would influence, and then the nurse would actually, because, the language is pretty precise. So the nurse would be much more likely to say, I called the advocate, previous, adoptive parents, and here's what they told me, So, yeah. And the report doesn't really say anything about what Cynthia might have said. Today, patient was at school. Her advocate, She states patient's friend spoke to her advocate today on the phone. Oh, I think I missed that. So what triggered her, according to Natalia, which is in this report, is that I think Cynthia spoke to Christine or Michael today on the phone about the past, and then that's what triggered her. So that's what she's saying anyway. Yeah, so we could imagine that even being more threatening, right? Because if Natalia is like desperate for any kind of person to pay attention, remember, like at this point, she's like 9 or 10 years old. So she finally found some people that would take her in and give her at least some attention. And then Cynthia calls the adoptive mom, which, would make sense that this concerned adult would say like, maybe I should talk to your, so that happens. And then that triggers Natalia to be like, oh no, you're going to be influenced by them, And because she doesn't have a way of expressing, maybe her today would go to Cynthia and say, I got to tell you something about Cynthia. Like or Christine, I got to tell you something about Christine. But at that age with those traumas, the behavior is violence and anger.
But that was not what's said.
Can we go back a little bit?
Go wherever you want.
So now I'm wondering, because, they've been interviewing the Manns and they've been speaking very glowingly about Natalia this whole time. So that kind of throws that into the question, maybe they have a bone to pick with Christine and they're downplaying things. I don't know. I don't have much to go off of, but there's something fishy.
You're over there, and she gets you to here. Stay out of my way or you'll never see your sons again. And she launches you on the ground, and the usual, who are you? Where have you been? And she's wailing it.
I don't know if I've talked about this yet, but as I often will talk about, PTSD, complex PTSD, trauma reactivity is difficult, obviously. And when triggered, the symptoms can become much worse. And a common trigger for people's PTSD symptoms is to recall the event that traumatized them, to either themselves to remember it or to talk about it, or to have other people talk about it or see images of it, or have smells that remind them of it, or other kinds of triggers to the memory. So it's important clinically for me and others like me in my field to take care when clients are about to talk about the traumas that they've been through. we need to do a lot of upfront work. I think I did talk about this in an earlier video about, emotional regulation. There's just a lot of prep that I go through with clients before we even begin to talk about, before I even encourage them to think about the traumas that they've been through. And so, as I'm watching this documentary, I'm seeing Natalia, talk about the traumas that she's been through, and the way she talks about it. I think she even said as much, that she doesn't like to think about it, which is normal for people with, and I don't know if she has PTSD. You can have trauma, major trauma, and not develop PTSD. You can develop a lot of other trauma reactions. PTSD is just one of the effects, possible effects of that kind of trauma. So I don't know if she has PTSD, and if she doesn't have PTSD, then it's less of a concern. But, so I've been wondering how she's doing as the documentary is asking her to recall. And in this moment, Michael is describing in full detail. He's also being really demonstrative, and he's role playing as if he's Christine, and he's pointing at her and saying, I'm just thinking, tone it down a little bit. And so, and he could be traumatized by it too. He could be triggering himself in this moment too. So as she has this reaction right now where she seems overwhelmed or sad, or something's coming up for her, I don't know which one it is. If it's a spike that's high in distress, then that's indicative of PTSD, which would tell us that we shouldn't have her exposed to these stories by asking her questions or by telling her a story until she has recovered from PTSD sufficiently. However, if her reaction is just the kind of feelings you get of sadness and pain, emotional pain that you feel when you recall something that was bad that happened to you, then that isn't, it's not likely to be damaging to, one, hear about the story, and two, to have emotions in this moment. But I don't know which one it is, and maybe we'll see some indications here. So when I watch these shows, I think there's this, of course the documentarians they're just champing at the bit to get these kinds of scenes, recalling the trauma and the emotions. And I don't blame them for not knowing these kinds of things. I mean, maybe they should look into it if they're professionals. But, I don't know. I just wish that Natalia had a therapist that would sign off on these things. Like, okay, because if she were my client, I would assess this, obviously. And then if PTSD was present, I would say, you can't go into that material until we get to that point in our therapy. You could actually make your PTSD worse if you go into those stories and those narratives. It can actually cause this huge spike in distress and fear and terror that can make the original traumas even more avoided, because there's yet another reason to avoid those emotions. And therefore, as the next time you're triggered, you'll have an even bigger distress reaction, and perhaps more dissociation or more acting out or whatever.
I'm stunned from what's going on. I'm shocked. I'm frozen in fear. And I know for a fact, if I do anything, I never see Wesley, Ethan, or Jacob ever again. And I hate to put it to you in that fashion, but I just wanted to have my family all together. So I start recording it.
It's notable just how little compassion he has. It's just like he's telling a story. The way it comes across is he's trying to make a case that he's a victim. He's still in that kind of mode. Instead of looking at his daughter and seeing and having some care, he could continue the story, but there's an attunement of some level that he just is not exhibiting.
And the only thing I can think is, if I could just show her, look at this. This is abhorrent. I'm just thinking maybe I could just show it to her and she'll see how bad she is and she'll stop. She'll realize she's gone too far and she'll stop.
I still can't tell what is happening for her, or there's not a lot of indication. She turned away, which makes me worry that it is a PTSD reaction. but it very well could be a grief reaction, a sadness reaction. It's still not great, but it actually could be, quote unquote, cathartic for her to hear him tell this story and to feel the feelings and to get it out there. It actually could be healing to have this moment. It looks painful, but sometimes healing is painful. So I can't really tell. I'm worried, though. It would be weird if she didn't have PTSD, right? But it's also possible that the amount of physical abuse terror that she went through was, minimal compared to the amount of gaslighting and brainwashing and, the sort of harm that she went through with Christine and others. Because the foundation of PTSD is terror, is that spike in adrenaline and fight or flight that is extreme and often chronic, and there's a feeling that your life is at risk. And so it's possible that those major spikes in the moment didn't happen. It was very distressful, it was very painful, it was very hurtful emotionally, but it didn't have that terror, chronic terror element. I don't know. I kind of hope that she doesn't, for obvious reasons, but also so that she didn't develop PTSD, and thus, in this moment, she's not being further harmed.
While she's up there, I get my phone and I hit play on it so I could look at it, and it's just disgusting. Unfortunately, while I'm looking at it, she showed up right behind me. And if I ever want to see my kids again, I have to reset my phone right now in front of her and delete everything.
So we told this story before. It's slightly different. I think there's just more detail. And it's possible that this happened. But if he really wanted to document by video or audio or something the abuse that was happening, he could have tried again. And even if she did manage to get this erased, it's not like that was the end of the road for him. So it says something, but I think to him it says, well, then it was over. Now, he could make a case of, I was very concerned about our marriage if I even attempted to do that again, but he still had the free will to act differently. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.